Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your daily deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Chris, and joining me as always is Laura.
Thanks, Chris. And I have to say, I have been waiting all week to talk about this one because a payments company just spent more than $7 billion on something most people have never heard of.
Okay, that framing already has my attention, so let me ask the obvious question first. Who is the buyer, who is the seller, and why should anyone outside of a developer channel actually care about it?
The buyer is Stripe, the payments infrastructure company that quietly moves money for an enormous slice of the internet. The seller is a company called OpenRouter, and the reported price is north of $7 billion.
Stripe I understand completely, since almost every checkout button I have clicked in the last decade probably touched their systems at some point. OpenRouter is the part that I need you to unpack for me.
OpenRouter is what the industry calls a model gateway. Instead of wiring your application separately into every AI provider, you integrate once with them, and they hand you access to more than 400 models.
So it is essentially a universal adapter for artificial intelligence, which sounds convenient, but also sounds like the kind of thing a weekend project could replicate. Where does the actual defensibility in that business come from?
The defensibility is in the traffic and the relationships, not the code. Roughly 8 million developers use the platform, and at the time of the last funding round, it was routing about 100 trillion tokens every month.
100 trillion tokens a month is a number I genuinely cannot picture. So help me translate that into something a normal human brain can hold on to without immediately glazing over.
Annualized, that is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 quadrillion tokens flowing through a single pipe. Every one of those tokens is a metered unit that somebody, somewhere, eventually gets billed for.
And that word metered feels like it is doing an enormous amount of work in this story, because it starts to sound less like software and more like a utility company with a meter on the wall.
That is exactly the analogy the smartest analysis of this deal keeps reaching for. Whoever sits between the application and the model and counts the consumption occupies the position of the meter, not the power plant.
Let me push on the price for a second, though, because $7 billion is a serious number, even for a company of the scale that Stripe operates at today. Was this company already worth that?
Not remotely, and this is the part that made my jaw drop. In May of this year, OpenRouter raised $113 million at a valuation of roughly $1.3 billion.
Hold on. So we are talking about a re-rating of more than 5 times the company value in something like 3 months, without any obvious change in the underlying product or the market it serves?
More than 5 times in about 90 days, yes. And if you look at revenue rather than valuation, the multiple gets even more eye-watering than the headline number by itself suggests.
Give me the revenue picture, because I suspect this is where the story stops being a normal acquisition and starts being a statement about what the buyer believes about the next 5 years.
Estimates put annualized revenue around $50 million earlier this spring. Against a $7 billion price, that is roughly 140 times revenue, which is not a number you justify with unit economics.
140 times revenue is not a valuation. That is a thesis, dressed up as a spreadsheet. So what is the thesis in the most direct terms you can give me without the usual acquisition press release language?
The thesis is that models are becoming interchangeable commodities. And when that happens, the durable value stops living in the intelligence itself and migrates upward into the layer that aggregates and measures it.
I want to sit with that claim because it is genuinely contrarian. For 3 years, the entire narrative has been that the frontier labs capture everything and everyone else is a thin wrapper on top.
Right. And the counter-narrative says the thin wrapper is where the customer relationship lives. Developers do not rewrite their integration every time a benchmark flips. They just change one line and route somewhere else.
That is a fair point about switching costs, but it cuts both ways. If it is that easy for a developer to switch models, is it not equally easy to switch away from the gateway itself?
That is the strongest objection to the whole deal, and I do not want to wave it away. Router economics can compress fast, and there are real competitors already building the same capability in parallel.
Name them for me, because I think a lot of listeners assume this is a one-company category, and I suspect the reality is considerably more crowded than the headline coverage would suggest.
Databricks and Cloudflare are both building routing into their platforms. There is an open-source project called Light LLM that a lot of teams run themselves, and every large cloud has ambitions here.
So Stripe just paid a very large premium for a strong position in a category that is not remotely closed. That is either brave or expensive, and I am not sure which one yet.
The honest answer is probably both, and I think the people involved would say the same thing privately. What they bought is a lead and a brand, not a moat with a drawbridge on it.
Let me come back to the buyer for a moment, because I think the identity of the acquirer explains more about this deal than any of the metrics we have discussed so far.
Stripe was valued at $159 billion in a tender offer in February and processed something like $1.9 trillion in total payment volume across last year alone.
So this is not a company that needs a new business line to survive, which means the purchase has to be defensive or strategic or a bet on a market that does not fully exist yet.
I think it is all three, and there is a lovely detail that makes the logic almost self-evident. Stripe was already the company processing payments for OpenRouter before any of these talks began.
That is a wonderful detail because it means Stripe could literally see the transaction volume growing on its own rails and decided it would rather own the meter than merely service it.
Exactly. And the founder has been saying for a while that he built the company to be the Stripe for AI, which is a striking thing to say right before the actual Stripe buys you.
Tell me about that founder, because the background here is one of those details that makes the whole story feel a little more legible once you know where the person came from originally.
His name is Alex Atala. He started the company in 2023, and before that, he co-founded OpenSea, which was one of the defining marketplaces of the previous technology cycle entirely.
So he has already built one business whose entire value proposition was being the neutral venue where other people transact. And now he has done exactly the same thing one layer down in the stack.
That is a sharp way to put it. Both companies are marketplaces where the operator never owns the underlying asset. And both got valued on the traffic they carried rather than the inventory they held.
Let me ask about the investor list, because I glanced at it and it looked less like a normal venture round and more like a roll call of everyone who has a stake in this outcome.
You are not wrong. The round was led by Capital G, which is the growth fund inside Alphabet, and the participants included venture arms attached to NVIDIA, ServiceNow, MongoDB, Snowflake, and Databricks.
That is genuinely unusual. When 5 infrastructure companies all put money into the same neutral routing layer, they are not investing for returns. They are buying a seat at a table that matters.
And that tells you how the industry reads this layer. Nobody wants a single gateway they cannot influence, so everyone bought a small piece of the one that was clearly pulling ahead of the field.
Now let me be the skeptic for a few minutes, because I think this conversation would be incomplete if we only made the bull case for a deal that carries some very real execution risk.
Please do, because I've been enthusiastic for 20 minutes and somebody should hold the other side of this seriously, rather than performing a token objection and then quietly agreeing with everything anyway a moment later.
My first concern is disintermediation. A large enterprise spending tens of millions on inference is going to negotiate directly with a lab for volume pricing, and that contract routes around the gateway entirely.
That is correct, and it is already happening at the top of the market. The counter is that the long tail of 8 million developers is not negotiating anything. They are just calling an endpoint.
My second concern is that the labs themselves may simply not want this. If you are a frontier lab, being one interchangeable option in a drop-down menu is close to a strategic nightmare.
Completely agree. And there is a real possibility that pricing terms or availability get quietly structured to make direct integration more attractive than going through any aggregator, whoever happens to own it.
Which raises the question of whether the thing Stripe actually bought is the routing, or whether the routing is almost incidental, and the real asset is the billing relationship underneath it.
I think the billing is the asset, full stop. Routing is the reason developers show up, but metering and settlement is the reason a payments company would pay a $7 billion price for it.
And that connects to the part of the story that I find most interesting, which is the idea that software agents are about to become customers who buy things without a human in the loop.
That is the long game here. When autonomous agents are both consuming model calls and initiating payments, whoever owns the gateway and the payment rail is standing at the exact intersection of both flows.
So the $7 billion is not really a price for 100 trillion tokens a month. It is an option on a machine-to-machine economy that does not meaningfully exist yet.
That is the cleanest summary of the deal I have heard, and it also explains why the revenue multiple looks absurd. You are not buying a business, you are buying a position in a future one.
Let me ask the practical question that a working developer listening to this is probably shouting at their phone right now. Does anything about my day actually change because of this transaction?
In the short term, almost certainly not, and the acquiring company has said nothing publicly, declining to comment on what it called rumors and speculation about the transaction in the first place.
In the longer term, though, I would be watching for whether neutrality survives ownership, because the entire pitch of this platform was that it prevents lock-in. and treats every provider even-handedly.
That is the tension I would flag for anyone building on it. A neutral aggregator owned by a company with its own commercial ambitions has to work harder to prove that neutrality every single quarter.
Which is a pattern we've seen in every infrastructure cycle, where the independent connector gets acquired and then slowly, gently starts optimizing for the parent rather than for the ecosystem around it.
And the market usually notices eventually. If routing decisions ever start looking commercially motivated rather than performance motivated, the switching cost we described earlier stops being a moat and becomes an exit door.
So the summary I'm taking away is that a payments company just made a very large, very early bet that the meter matters more than the model, and the next few years will test it.
That is it, exactly. Value is migrating up the stack toward whoever counts the units, and this deal is the first time somebody put a 9-figure conviction behind that idea in public.
And if that thesis is wrong, the lesson will be equally clear, which is that in a market moving this fast, the aggregation layer was never as durable as the intelligence underneath it.
Either way, we will know within about 2 years, and I suspect this transaction is going to get cited constantly as the moment the industry started pricing infrastructure instead of pricing models.
That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.